Hello and welcome. I'm Eric Gao, and here's what happened this week. President Tsai will soon be heading to the U.S. She'll be stopping over in New York and L.A. on her way to and from a state visit to allies in Central America. Leslie Liao has more details about her trip.
President Tsai is headed to Guatemala and Belize, two of Taiwan's diplomatic allies in Central America. It'll be the first overseas trip she's taken since the COVID-19 pandemic. The president is scheduled to leave on March 29th and will return on April 7th. She will head to Guatemala first and then on to Belize on April 3rd.
在去年9月，瓜地马拉的贾迈代总统特别邀请蔡总统能够访问瓜地马拉。此外，贝里斯总理布里先纽伉俪曾于去年3月访台。因此，为了回应友邦多次诚挚的邀请及展现对友邦的重视，那我们也要持续深化民主盟友间的合作发展。
Joining Tsai on the trip are high-ranking officials like Foreign Minister Joseph Wu, Secretary General to the President Ling Jialong, and Deputy Economics Minister Chen Zengqi. They'll discuss welfare programs, infrastructure, and trade with their Guatemalan and Belizean counterparts. Tsai's trip comes at a crucial time. Last week, another Central American ally, Honduras, announced that it would cut ties with Taiwan in favor of China. The trip will entail two stopovers in the United States, one in New York and one in Los Angeles. And it's been reported that while in California, President Tsai will meet with U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Last week, the White House said that Tsai's transits through the U.S. are just that, transits, and they do not constitute official visits. Such stopovers in the U.S. are a sensitive topic because Taiwan and the United States share only unofficial ties. China claims Taiwan as part of its territory and strongly protests any reference to its independent sovereignty. With Taiwan-Honduran ties hanging by a thread, Tsai's trip to Central America will hope to stabilize friendships in the region. Eason Sun and Leslie Liao for TaiwanPlus.
While Tsai is heading to the U.S., her predecessor is heading to China. Former President Ma Ying-jeou's trip will start just a few days before Tsai's. It'll be the first time that one of Taiwan's former presidents has traveled across the strait in over 70 years.
A historic announcement. Former President Ma Ying-jeou's foundation says Ma is heading to China. He'll be there from March 27th to April 7th. It'll be the first time that a former leader of Taiwan has been to China since 1949. A spokesperson for Ma says the trip will help ease tensions between the two sides.
马前总统他卸任之后，非常关心两岸的事务。他深切认为，如果能够让年轻人重新交流、重新对话，一定会可以降低目前的紧张形势。
This isn't Ma's first groundbreaking trip. In 2015, during his second term, Ma met with China's leader Xi Jinping in Singapore. It was the first meeting of leaders from the two sides since 1945. But he's not expected to meet with Xi this time. His itinerary will take him to places like Nanjing and Shanghai, but not Beijing. It's still unknown whether he will meet with any Chinese officials. However, the ruling Democratic Progressive Party is urging Ma not to let his visit be used by Beijing for propaganda purposes.
不要涉及被统战或是被分化这样的方式。
The trip comes as tensions between Beijing and Washington are escalating. There are concerns that Ma's visit could send the wrong message to the U.S. about Taiwan's position. But Ma's foundation says the trip is mostly about cultural and historic exchanges, and that Ma wants to use this trip to educate Taiwan's young people about the country's past ties with China.
我想我们政治性这么低然后又是祭祖跟交流，我相信美方应该也会有相当的理解跟认同。
People in Taiwan and the U.S. will be closely watching Ma's trip to see whether it is just for cultural exchanges or if it turns out to be slightly more political than that.
It's not just Taiwan's leaders making international trips. Chinese President Xi Jinping spent 2 days in Moscow. While he was there, Russian President Vladimir Putin welcomed China's peace plan for the war in Ukraine. But critics say China's self-declared role as international peace broker is not as impartial as it may seem. Joyce Zheng reports.
China's leader Xi Jinping at the Kremlin on Tuesday, meeting with Russian counterpart President Vladimir Putin. It's the second day of Xi's state visit to Moscow. This is the Chinese leader's first trip to Russia since the country invaded Ukraine last year. On the agenda, Beijing's 12-point peace plan for the war. Notably absent from the proposal is any requirement for Russia to withdraw its troops from Ukraine. Putin has welcomed the plan, saying it, quote, correlates to the point of view of the Russian Federation.
За углубление российско-китайского всеобъемлющего партнерства и стратегического взаимодействия.
为深化俄中全面战略协作伙伴关系.
За процветание и благополучие народов России и КНР.
为了俄罗斯和中国人民繁荣昌盛.
Invade.
Invade.
Despite the two leaders toasting their friendship, Beijing has claimed to be a neutral party when it comes to the war in Ukraine. It's a position many countries in the West view with extreme skepticism. In response to the meeting in Moscow, the U.S. says China has not shown any meaningful impartiality in its efforts to negotiate peace.
I don't think you can reasonably look at China as impartial in any way. They haven't condemned this this invasion. They haven't stopped buying Russian oil and Russian energy. So now if China wants to play a constructive role here in this conflict, then they ought to press Russia to pull its troops out of Ukraine and Ukrainian sovereign territory. They should urge President Putin to cease bombing cities, hospitals, and schools, to stop the war crimes and the atrocities, and end the war today.
By Tuesday evening in Moscow, Putin and Xi had signed two joint pacts on stronger economic ties and energy cooperation. These agreements also come just days after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin for war crimes in Ukraine, a detail left out of the Chinese state-run media coverage of Xi's visit. Beijing's ties with Moscow have only become more important given continued U.S.-led sanctions on Russia since the beginning of the war. This places Xi, who has just been handed an unprecedented third term as president, in the driver's seat in his proclaimed friendship with Putin.
He also uses the word trust a lot, which itself I think is a little bit, revealing in that the relationship so far has not really been based on trust. It's based on a coincidence of interests. Russia is the junior partner in the relationship between the two, that it means that the so-called no limits partnership essentially does have limits, but those limits increasingly are set by Beijing, and the message is, well, you're just going to have to trust us.
Following his Moscow trip, Xi is reportedly set to hold a virtual meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as Beijing continues working to position itself in the role of peacemaker. But despite China's messages of peace and Putin's praise for the country's plan, there is still little sign of a diplomatic breakthrough over Ukraine. Eason Pan and Joyce Zhen for TaiwanPlus.
In a major diplomatic development, Taiwan has recalled its ambassador to Honduras. The move was in protest against the Central American nation's decision to establish ties with China.
The end of an era. Taiwan's foreign ministry announced on Thursday that the country's ambassador to Honduras will soon be heading home. This comes a week after Honduran President Xiomara Castro said that her government would work to establish formal relations with Beijing. By doing so, Honduras would cut diplomatic ties with Taiwan, which China considers as part of its territory. Taiwan's foreign minister, Joseph Wu, says Honduras is switching allegiances because Taiwan is unable to compete with China's so-called checkbook diplomacy. He also says that China has played a hand in influencing the Central American country in their decision. According to Wu, Castro's government has demanded $6 billion from Beijing and $2.4 billion from Taiwan at the same time, something Honduras denies.
由于我们不跟中国进行金钱外交，所以现在已经进入了一个非常辛苦的一个阶段。
This development comes after Honduran Foreign Minister Eduardo Enrique Reina traveled to China on Wednesday to, quote, promote the establishing of diplomatic relations. In response, Taiwan summoned Honduras' ambassador to Taipei to express strong dissatisfaction with the move. In Taiwan's parliament, legislators from the main opposition party, the Kuomintang, asked whether Honduras will cut ties with Taiwan during President Tsai Ing-wen's upcoming visit to Central America. One opposition legislator even asked if Foreign Minister Wu had previous knowledge that Honduras was planning the move, since Tsai had not included Honduras in her trip.
怎么会变成对国会扯谎，对国人扯谎？
我没有扯谎，
没有空去，为什么现在变成是因为大开金口，所以不敢去？
Chris Dodd, the U.S. Special Presidential Advisor, was sent to Honduras on Monday to discuss the issue with President Castro. Foreign Minister Reyna has said that the U.S. respects his country's decision to normalize relations with China. But this sentiment was clearly not shared by officials in Taipei, where the diplomatic spat between Taiwan and Honduras continues to deteriorate amid accusations of Beijing's involvement.
The diplomatic row over Honduras is just one example of the rising tensions between Taiwan and China. But despite that, the United States Air Force Secretary says it's unlikely that China will try to invade Taiwan anytime soon. Frank Kendall was speaking on the sidelines of a defense conference in Singapore on Thursday. But Kendall also says Chinese activity could damage stability in the Indo-Pacific region. He highlighted actions in the South and East China Seas, where China has territorial disputes with several nations.
China has done a number of things that are fairly aggressive in the region. The South China Sea, obviously expanding their role there and militarizing that. They've had some much more aggressive behaviors around Taiwan with regard to the Senkakus as well. So Chinese behavior has not, in many cases, been consistent with keeping a stable situation here.
The 2023 Taipei Fashion Week kicked off Wednesday night. The show headed to southern Taiwan for the first time ever and shows off autumn and winter looks. Our reporter Sandy Chi was there to see the traditional Taiwanese fashion and designs on display.
More local, more fashionable, and more Taiwan. This is a bold statement of this time's Taipei Fashion Week for winter and autumn 2023.
For the first time, the opening is being held in southern Taiwan at the historic Nankunshen Daitian Temple. More than 1,000 people packed into the temple to witness mesmerizing works from local designers and artists. This fashion show is now entering its 6th year. A total of 70 sets of outfits by 7 designers and 7 traditional artists are on display at the event. It's an ideal opportunity for local brands to strut their stuff and also showcase some of the wonders of Taiwanese culture.
我们一直希望我们设计师的魔法像魔法师一样，把台湾的文化带到国际。那如果能够经过艺术家跟时尚设计师的转化，能够让老百姓去感受我们传统的美好以及时尚的美好，那这个两个结合，我相信是一个新的尝试。
Preparations for the show started early in the morning. Just a few hours before the opening ceremony, designers and models were rushing to get things ready and add some final touches. One of the local artists here is Zhuang Wunan, who's widely regarded as a national treasure. He's known for painting traditional buildings such as Taoist temples. It's his first time participating in any fashion show, and it's also his first time creating art with body paint.
我感觉很好了，怎么很好呢？因为艺术就是本来就是要展示出去呀。我们以前很保守啊，现在我们这个功夫传出去是很好。
The collections are inspired by imagery of the Bajiajiang, 8 generals recognized as members of the godly realm, plus patterns familiar to traditional Taiwanese opera and shadow puppetry. Zhou Yuying is one of the designers exhibiting at the event. For him, this is an opportunity to create something fresh by combining the old and the new.
因为在地的东西其实对外国人来讲是比较陌生，也比较 fresh， 所以把这些比较 fresh element 放在比较当代的一些像是比较现在街头的线条，我觉得那个冲撞感是我们只是想要表达。
The event will run from March 22nd until April 8th. And beyond the festivities, the purpose of the occasion is to showcase the unique culture, traditional arts, temple aesthetics, and fashion that Taiwan has to offer. Kama Xu and Sandy Chi for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching Here's What Happened. We'll leave you with Friday's opening ceremony of the National Indigenous Games in Taipei. I'm Eric Gao. Take care and see you next week.